All right. Hello, welcome. Welcome to the Groundswell workshop on invasive species. Today is February 11th, 2021, and we are excited to bring a very full program to you today. This workshop is brought to you by Groundswell and the MySTEM network. Groundswell is a coalition of community partners creating opportunities for hands-on learning in West Michigan over the last 10 years. Today's agenda looks like this. We have this beginning greeting and introductions. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your name, your organization or school, and we'd love to know if you teach, what grades you're teaching. And I also want to point out the chat will be the best way to ask questions throughout the session. We have 3 speakers and 4 different segments. So we're hoping to make sure we can ask all questions at the end of the segment. So we will pay attention to those being added to the chats and we will ask them to our presenters. If there's extra time at the end, we will turn off, we can take the mute off and have more of a conversation. We'll see how it goes. We're going to start off this evening with our first speaker, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her in a moment. Her name is Jessie Schulte. She's from the Kent Conservation District. She has been a Groundswell partner for as long as I can remember. She works with our schools and provides lots of expertise and knowledge on the subject of invasive species. And before we jump into Jessie's presentation, because I am going to turn over sharing screen with her, I wanted to thank all the contributors to our presentation today, not only Jessie, but also Mark Fitzpatrick, Ginny Wanty, and many more went into this planning. So thank you all. And speaking of Ginny, she was able to find us, even though we were told they were out of print, a copy of the Invasive Species Guide for West Michigan, the terrestrial invasive species. So everybody attending this workshop tonight will be getting a copy of that guidebook. I will contact you after this event and let you know how to claim it. So be sure and hang on to the end. All right, well, I'm going to let Jessie begin her presentation because we have lots to learn. So thank you so much for joining us and welcome our presenter, our first presenter, Jessie Schulte.
You're muted, Jessie.
Thank you very much for having us. I actually supervise the Kent and the Montcalm Invasive Species Strike Team. I've been doing that for about 4 years through the Kent Conservation District. And our mission is to protect and enhance the natural resources of Kent County. And we actually do this through grants and partnerships. And we also offer a spring and fall native plant sale. And you can go to our website, kentconservation.org, to check out our tree catalog that's coming up for our sale April 24th. We're also really honored that we are partnering with the West Michigan Conservation Network, which is your local cooperative invasive species management area. And there's actually a cooperative invasive species management area in every county in Michigan. And our West Michigan Conservation Network has over 59 partners and covers 7 counties. And you can check out our website because we often have a lot of workshops that might be useful to those that want to manage invasives. So I want everybody to close your eyes for just 1 minute and picture one of your favorite beautiful natural areas that are here in Michigan. All right, and then I want you to open your eyes, and that location that you might have envisioned might be up in the UP. But now I want you to think about school properties as taking the lead and becoming invasive species free in their communities, because what we actually do in our own school yards and backyards will actually ultimately impact that natural area that you so love, even if it's up in the UP, because birds are spreading the berries. So teachers, groundkeepers, and maintenance crews will need to come together to learn how to properly identify and treat their local invasive species on the ground and in their campuses. So many of you took part in the survey before. Several of you have a lot of experience with invasives, so I apologize for going over certain species that you might know. We're going to review several invasive species, and then we'll have an example by Mark Fitzpatrick, and then we'll close with actually techniques on how to control these specific invasives. So as you work with partners and teachers' aides, you need to remind everyone that not all green is created equal. And it really does make a difference that we're protecting native species and that we learn to identify invasive species. For many of our campuses, and unfortunately for our students, students might not ever have a chance to really experience a high quality natural area. A lot of what their school properties are looking like are lawns, and garlic mustard at the bottom of this imagery, or our invasive Bradford pear. As development continues to expand, and we have over 50 million acres of lawn, and some of that lawn is important on our campuses, we need to think about these invasive species that we're highlighting today as a biological pollutant on your campus. So if you think of an oil spill, they rush in and contain it. There might be some remnants of that oil spill, but for invasives, when those invasives spill out from our landscaping, they are growing, adapting, proliferating, and spreading indefinitely, and then causing that economic and environmental damage that is a cost to our society. So think of these invasives as a biological pollutant that interrupts our food chains and also pollutes the soil life. Here's an example at Blandford Nature Center where I worked for 5 years. We've got our invasive buckthorn that we were able to cut and control, but then those thousands of berries are in the soil, kind of polluting that soil and stopping some of the natives from regenerating. So when you're working with your groundskeepers or maybe a parent, you need to remind them that the wording does matter. So they'll think, oh, that's just a weed. Well, there really is a difference between a weed and an invasive plant. So interchangeably, we use exotic, non-native, non-indigenous, alien, or naturalized. And a weed is like a dandelion. So we have a lot of European weeds, but the invasives are what we're really concerned about. These non-native invasives do not have any predators that keep them in check here in Michigan. They haven't developed those complex relationships. And so these non-natives become very aggressive. In Michigan, our definition is if it causes harm or is likely to cause harm to the economy, the environment, or human health. Whereas a weed might be poison ivy, it's native, it can be invasive in disturbed areas, and we might want to contain it, but it's not an invasive non-native. And the good news is only about 10% of these really invasives that come to us are going to become those super weeds. Again, in Michigan, it's species that cause harm to our economy, our environment, or human health. And it costs the US about $120 to $140 billion a year. You remember the emerald ash borer, and they estimate that that impact was $3.4 billion just to our communities, and that's not even looking at the ecological impact and how to really rate that cost. The good news is, as we enter this journey, it can be very overwhelming, like which invasive to focus on, and there's too many, how can we control them? I want to give you a great example in New York City, where they were able to spot an invasive, the longhorn beetle, and actually contain it. And this is one that we can use students and teachers to look for in Michigan. There's a lot of different early detection invasive species. The Midwest Invasive Plant Watch List is a great place. You can go to this link after this program. We'll send you this as a PDF, and they have clickable links, and you can actually print this for your classroom. Several of the invasives on there are ones you're going to watch for, like Japanese stiltgrass. This is me spraying the Japanese stiltgrass in Ada, where it's become kind of aggressive. Again, checking and removing these invasive species before they become established is so important. And that can also be on the scale of your campuses as well. So again, you want to figure out what species you have and how many species you have to try to prevent them from spreading, because once they reach this top point of the curve here, it's very difficult for management. Another early detection species is our spotted lanternfly, and it's known to suck sap in over 70 different plants, including our walnuts and hardwood trees. This is one you can look for its host. The host is the tree of heaven. So this is one that you might be able to cut and control the host. It looks similar to staghorn sumac, but then you'd be actually stopping the spread, or at least spotted lanternfly is not here in Michigan yet, but it's one that's on our watch list. The other program for those teachers that might not be able to have the time to do a full inventory of their campus, what they could do is adopt a sentinel tree. And they could periodically measure and monitor the condition of that tree and watch for, whether it's a maple, even a non-native Norway maple, watch for Asian longhorn beetles, or your hemlocks, watch for the woolly adelgid, or if it's a walnut, watch for the thousand cankers disease. So how do these invasives get here? So the ones we want you to focus on your campus, actually 85% of these woody invasives are coming from the nursery industry. And Michigan has a powerful nursery lobby, and they're one of the larger producers in the United States. An example is Bradford pear that's been planted on your campuses and it's kind of escaped from cultivation. And now we're finding it even in Proven Park, kind of taking over areas. The other one that's escaped from cultivation that's an ornamental is called black jetbead. This species is in the rose family, and we've seen it at Amon Park and Proven Park as well. And this one's easy to look for. But again, these are super weeds, or super invasive plants that are actually growing faster than we can control them. They're causing economic, environmental, and human health harm. Another example is the rusty crayfish, which is one that you can look for even in retention basins. And this one in the south of the US is not considered invasive, but up in Michigan, we're worried about it impacting fish populations. And the other thing that we always do to try to convince some of the maintenance and grounds folks is that these invasives can cause property value declines, or in the case of Oriental bittersweet, they can actually impact and cause hazards or safety issues. So think about that. We've got a specific example here with the central woodlands. It's so nice to be able to work with Patty and Chris Patrick over at Central Woodlands. And here we have a map where we wanted to show you context. So this is a wonderful campus. I know not all schools are fortunate enough to have a beautiful forested area, but you can see in the outline in yellow that this campus is adjacent to Carl Creek Preserve in Ada. And Carl Creek Preserve has a creek system that actually connects and drains into the Grand River. So again, what they're going to be doing and working on in terms of invasive species on central woodlands will impact the greater watershed. For your schoolyards, what we're recommending is that you prioritize species that have the greatest impact to our natural communities and ecological processes, like water quality, like birds spreading buckthorn berries. And then second, that you prioritize the impact to your restoration activities or your native plantings. So for example, English ivy might not be a state listed species. However, this invasive might impact your native planting area, so then it would become a high priority for you on your campus. The same with poison ivy. So I wanted to just highlight a few species that I'm seeing a lot at some of the Groundswell schools. And then after we have an example from Mark, we'll talk about techniques on how to control. Again, you're so fortunate that today you're going to be able to get the invasive ID book, and this will be a great way for you to identify these in the field, since I can't cover that many species today. But I also encourage you to use the modules on MISN. Your students can go through a training. You can pick out 3 priority species that you think are on your campus and have your students do these modules at home. They're very easy to do. And they actually go through the key characteristics of the species, and then they have a mini quiz. And I've done this with 6th graders. The first species I want you guys to have an eye out for is called poison hemlock. And I've seen this on 2 Groundswell schools and at the kids' food basket. And unfortunately, this species is coming in on mulch and compost soil. And how you look for it is it has these kind of red blotchy stems. So if you look at the wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace to the left, or to your right here, the Queen Anne's lace, the poison hemlock is distinctive because of those purple blotches. And it's got kind of like a fern-like appearance. It's finely toothed. And this is one you have to be really careful with. You want to dig it up and make sure you have gloves on when you dispose of this, because if you get this in your mouth or in your eyes, it is poisonous. The other species I'd really like you to prioritize is called Japanese barberry. This invasive is actually planted along school properties for ornamental reasons or also adjacent landowners. And it might be purple, and people think that it's so beautiful, but then what ends up happening is that it escapes from cultivation. It turns green and spiny, and it can actually increase the amount of ticks and Lyme's disease in your area. The white-footed mouse loves to make its home underneath these shrubs because it's so spiny and pokey. All of these invasives I'm talking about are going to be the first plants to leaf out, so you can identify them easily in the spring. And we want to make sure that you remove these from your property. The other species is buckthorn. There's 2 different species of buckthorn. They have escaped from cultivation as well. One is called common buckthorn and the other is glossy. And they're easy to tell in the winter by the bark and the buds. On the common buckthorn, you can actually just scrape a little bit of the bark out and you can see that bright orange color. That's an easy identifier. The birds are spreading buckthorn, and unfortunately can give birds diarrhea. A lot of the students that I work with, they call it the diarrhea tree. And this is one like at Central Woodlands, we don't want the buckthorn to spread into those high quality natural areas like the Carl Creek Preserve that's right across the street. Buckthorn's also been shown in the lab to impact frog embryo development. And so winter is a great time to treat buckthorn. So that way in the spring, you don't have the loading. The imodin chemical comes from the leaves, the stems, and the berries into our water column. Winter ID on buckthorn. There's not much of a thorn on buckthorn. It's not like hawthorn. It's just a small pointed branch tip. Right here, you see a picture of the cherry. You're going to want to look at multiple branches when you're working with your students out in the field. And what I often do is take laminated cards, and you can just put some yarn through the laminated cards and put it on your neck. And then you can have your ID cards for bud ID when you're out in the field. At Central Woodlands, they brought up a good point. They actually had the Bradford pear escaping from the parking lot, and it kind of looked like buckthorn because it also has a pointed branch tip. But you can see that the bud is very different on the Bradford pear than the buckthorn is. So here's a common and glossy buckthorn with that orange bark in the winter. And this plant is also impactful of our agriculture. And unfortunately, in any of the areas you want to do plantings, they've done multiple studies where the buckthorn is pumping allelopathic chemicals into the ground. And so you're going to want to make sure you control your buckthorn before you do your native plantings, or that you do some soil amendments. Here's an example of just buckthorn taking over in a meadow. Autumn olive is another one that might be confused with buckthorn, but this is a woody invasive that you can prioritize. Look for those golden specks on the stem and the bud in the winter. There's nothing else that has those golden specks. Garlic mustard, many of you know garlic mustard, and this one we're definitely concerned about because it's invading into our high quality areas and it impacts our woodlands soil fungus, so it actually kills the mycorrhizae. And garlic mustard, it releases sinigrin into the soil, and this is toxic to other plants. So that's what's actually happening. So containing the garlic mustard in areas that you want to plant is so important as well. And garlic mustard has a relationship with invasive, are the deer that are becoming very aggressive. So the deer will actually come in and browse out all the high quality areas and eat all the trilliums and the natives. And then it creates more openings for this garlic mustard, and then they avoid that area, and it's kind of a negative cycle. There's several lookalikes to garlic mustard, including motherwort and hairy bittercrest. And you just want to get to know your garlic mustard by crushing it and identifying it, so that way you don't pull out your native wild violets. The species we're most concerned with is oriental bittersweet vine, Celastris orbiculatus. And this species can actually grow 66 feet tall and 2 inches a day during the summer when it's warm. And we blame Martha Stewart for spreading and encouraging people, because unfortunately people that bought wreaths at some of the Ada garden festivals were throwing their wreaths out the door. My example is someone that I volunteered at Blandford Nature Center. She had a wreath, she threw it out her sliding glass door near her kitchen, and the entire slope is covered. And at first she was really resistant to using more herbicide other than just mechanical, and now it has expanded and taken over her entire area. There is an American or a native bittersweet, but it's very rare. I haven't seen it or worked with it. The way you can tell the difference between the invasive and non-native is if you open up that capsule and you crush it in your hand, and if it has 1 seed, then that's the American bittersweet. And then the Asian or the Oriental bittersweet has a lot more berries, and it's kind of, the berries are axillary, so along the stem. And there might be even some crossbreeding between the American and the Asian. And there is actually a separate male and female. So sometimes people will say, well, mine's not producing berries. So there is a male and female bittersweet. Spotted knapweed is one that's very common on our campuses and can be very difficult to control. The good news is that there is a biocontrol that's not officially being available in Michigan, but it has reached Michigan, and we did see it at Blandford Nature Center. And this looks similar to our spotted knapweed, can sometimes look similar to other non-native invasives like our Canada thistle or our cutleaf teasel. And these were just a few of the invasives I wanted to highlight, and then we'll go into techniques on how to control them in a little bit. And so now I'll let Mark share some examples.
Thank you, Jessie. You are so efficient. We are right on time. Perfect. But first we were going to pause and see if we had any questions from the group for Jessie before we move on to the next portion of our program. Mara has been watching the chat. Do you see any questions? The first one, go ahead.
We don't have any questions specifically for Jessie, although now's the time if you want to pop one in the chat, you're welcome to. We did have a question about if the slides would be available after the event, which they will be. So those of you frantically taking notes will be able to share those slides with you. Doesn't look like we have any questions popping up in the chat. So if there are any, please feel free and we can address them later, but it looks like we can move forward.
Great. Before I switch back into the presentation and introduce Mark, I wanted to take a moment to show you the book that we are giving out for tonight. A Field Identification Guide to Invasive Plants in Michigan's Natural Communities. We wanted to focus on terrestrial. I know sometimes we talk more about the aquatic invasive species, but we thought it was worth spending some time speaking about the terrestrial invasive, so the land growing ones. Now, I'd love to take a quick informal survey in the chat before we move on and see if anyone has, after seeing Jessie's presentation, believes that they have seen invasive species growing on or near their campus. Take a minute, and if anybody knows they do, I would be curious to find out if you have any to to think about as your own campus. I know at Grand Valley, we have a lot of very grassy and closed landscaping, so we don't see a lot of invasives there. Okay. Purple loosestrife. Yes, you must be near water. All right. We are going to start. Let me make sure I've got Mark on deck here. And off your mute. Mark, you there?
Hi, everybody.
All right, I'm going to share the presentation for you. And so just let me know when you would like me to turn the page for you.
Good. Couple of notes. I put in the chat my email and phone number. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions. And two, Jessica is managing for the Zoom, my slideshow here. So I'm going to have to keep saying next for her to move it through. So be patient with that. We're moving through. So what I want to kind of go through with you, kind of calling it a case study. This is one of the projects we worked with Ada Township Parks in Groundswell. We probably worked directly with 5 schools and then several others kind of secondary over the last 10, 11 years. Groundswell's been going, but Forest Hills Eastern Middle School has been one of the ones that we really kind of went on for this whole time period. And it's a good little story. And it shows some challenges and some process. And so as you're planning or in the middle of a project, I just want to give you some perspective that might help you in planning. And so just we'll take a few minutes and then I'll be open for questions. So next. Thank you. So I use this kind of framework to orientate people, teachers and others doing planning and get going. And part of it's kind of like we call our Groundswell project. We want students to do research, come up with some data, make decisions from that data, and then action plans from that. But there's also a process that you really have to go through as schools and administrators and working with your community partners like ourselves in order to get these projects to work. And a lot of you have begun some of that process and others are still trying to work on it. But it really helps to identify a community partner, whether that's us or the conservation district or somebody from Wild Ones or a recycling person, if that's kind of your goal. And when you're doing your application for funding the Groundswell, to sit down with those folks to kind of make a plan and incorporate any costs into that, but also to get a sense of what this is going to be for you and your students. How much time can you put into it? How much time can your students put into it? Where does it fit in your school year? Where does it fit in your curriculum? And what kind of costs and resources need to be. And so we kind of start out with that pre-visit to the schools, and sit down with the teachers, do a walkthrough of the grounds and do an assessment of what's there and brainstorm on some ideas. Some folks have some really specific goals they want to do, and we try to narrow that into a realistic project and work through some of those. And then once we kind of have that framed up, that narrows it down a little bit to the when you can actually work with the students. Just to give it this school as an example, Forest Hills Eastern, we only have by their curriculum 1 week in the fall and 1 week in the spring that fits in with these themes. The rest of the time their schedule is full. And so we have to kind of say, okay, we'll schedule 2 days in the fall and 2 days in the spring to be our field days. And so that really limits to what you can do if you're trying to take on a project that you think, oh, we can work on this every day. You realistically may not be able to. Or if it's a project that requires work in the summer when the students aren't there. So it takes just some of that pre-planning. And then we start working with the students, and we kind of do that in 2 steps. Before we come in, we ask the teachers to do some of the background. So the students are aware of what Groundswell is, what their watershed is, what invasive plants are, non-invasive plants, and some of the background, and especially if it's a theme for their curriculum, that they're going to be doing some projects and some research-based activities as part of those themes the weeks that people come in. And then 2, that there will be helpers coming in, resource people, and kindly, how to behave and engage with those folks. We bring a lot of volunteers in with us, and other folks do that, and they're almost always appreciated, but these are people giving up of their time, and the time is really limited. So we have that background going in, and so the day that we come in to help, they already kind of have a mindset of what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. And I do that kind of then where I'll go in and do a slideshow similar to what I'm showing you today about what is Groundswell, what's your watershed, where are you at in it, why do we want to make a difference to where we live, how it affects the greater community, and what are some issues that's going to affect things ecologically that we can focus on. And if it comes to invasive plants as your focus, then some background on that and some of the ones that might be typical in their area. And by us doing a pre-site visit, like Jesse was talking about, we can identify some of the key ones that are on the grounds ahead of time to help the students with identification methods and issues related to those plants. So we kind of get all that ahead of time. Some days we do both. We'll go in the fall, we'll do 10 minutes in the classroom, then 20 minutes outside. And that doesn't seem like a lot of time, but we also had 100 to 200 students in a grade that we were working with, and we had 2 days to deal with all of them. So we had to break those down into classrooms. Each classroom, you got 45 minutes to an hour. And so you really are limited to the amount of time you have with the students actually doing the work. And for a lot of these students, landscape work is new to them, and identifying plants is new. Most want to be hands-on engaged, and we love that. We love getting them going. So we try to have a lot of the work preset. So we got piles of wood chips and tools and resource people and all the plants set, ready to go, so they can jump right in, have direction by people, and a lot of setup ahead of time so that those work days are really efficient. Early in the process, we give them some direction about inventorying their site, looking at issues coming up. And these are tasks that they do between visits of actually doing mapping. And those are great exercises to go out and inventory sites, their schools, and mapping. And if they can do data and do mapping, sometimes they start seeing, oh, we have a whole lot of these plants in one area and a little bit in this area. And when we first did this with the schools initially, they came up as recycling as one of their issues that they wanted to focus on. So the first year, in addition to invasive plants, they also worked on setting up a recycling program in the school. And once that was going, future years, they didn't need to create something new. So those kind of move through. And then there's an element where they get that data that they're starting to say, okay, we want to do something for invasives, or we want to do something for recycling. We see there's an issue, and they try to narrow that down and work with us, and then come up with a plan of action. And that takes a little bit of nurturing so we can narrow it down to something realistic, not only for the time, but for the priority, and something that they think they can help and make a difference, versus that they're taking on something that's way beyond their capability. Or to give an example, on one of the sites is a huge area of Phragmites and a fenced off water retention area. And the students really can't go into that water area. They couldn't use chemicals on it. But they understood that this was a highly, highly important plant to be dealt with, and they really wanted it off their campus. So part of their plan was to reach out to the school district to deal with that plant, and to others like outreach groups like ourselves, so that plant could be taken care of, even though it would be something the students would work on. And then there's others like the garlic mustard and the knapweed and the buckthorn and honeysuckle and others that we've found on campus that the students felt that they could do some work on. So we set up the plan, and then we had work days set up where they would do that. And once you do those work days, all plans are meant to be reviewed, meant to be redone. And with this, you have a new grade every year, perhaps working on the same theme. If you have seventh graders that you have this topic in project, for the next year, they're not going to be the same ones working on it. You got new students, so you can repeat that program. Or as we ended up, we started to progress that, okay, seventh graders start, but then eighth graders are going to do another step, and ninth graders are going to do another step, because they build a foundation over time as you get these fundamentals in their first couple of years. So even if you're starting with second graders and you're building that fundamentals of what invasive plants are and how to pull garlic mustard, that's a lesson learned that they can grow on and do other things in later years. Next. And so this is just kind of gives a little bit of show. Every time we go into the schools, the students have a real hard time understanding the word groundswell, and the parents have a hard time when the kids saying, "Oh yeah, we're working groundswell today." So we just kind of constantly talk about that it's work to help the Grand River watershed, and that they're part of a much bigger picture. So knowing that there's all these other schools involved and other students. Next. I don't have a clicker, sorry. And then I always try to give them a perspective, not just place-based, but watershed-based. Where do we stand on this planet? Where is our school? Where are we in the Great Lakes Basin? What lake do we affect? What river do we affect to that lake? What stream goes to that river from where we live and from our campus? And that can't be repeated enough. It's really a core mission within Groundswell and the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative. Next. So I take that imagery and I show them in our introductions that image and transfer it to this. Here is the watershed that is much more than the Grand River, and showing that it's going all the way from the Grand Haven, Jackson to Grand Haven. And sometimes it takes talking about going to the beach for them to understand, oh yeah, I've been there, and understanding how close it is. And the graphic to the right, the red dot is where the campus is. And just like Jesse showed for Central Woodlands, the water from that campus drains into a stream that goes right to the river. So we make that clear, and part of why it's important to take care of their campus, so they get that message that everything they do on campus affects the river, affects the lake. And so that's a constant theme to get it set up and motivate them toward action. Next. This is just a little background. We kind of started out with recycling, then moved to kind of more of identifying the invasives and trying to get those doing more serious habitat improvements. There's been other initiatives to do Native American gardening, as well as vegetable gardening on the campus that is growing out of some of these. And they've all been really challenging to sustain those projects, but they've been really great to see. And sometimes it doesn't need 10 years of sustaining as much as it needs that 20 minutes with the student to have a chance to do something out in the field and get a little bit of motivation and understanding. And then we have a huge component where the students give back. They go out into the community. And so we talk about, we're volunteer to help you at your school. We're asking you to come volunteer to help at our parks. And so the students from Eastern came out to Ada Park for a number of years. They would pull 200 bags or so of garlic mustard in a season. It helps to have 200 kids come out in 2 days. And those numbers went into the stewardship network count. So they were like trying to get the trophy for the area, and proud to know that we received that. But also some ideas of helping in their own neighborhoods. And they start seeing that they can do stuff at home. And in their neighbors, and some of them start getting the bug and helping out. Next. Some of the plants that they found on the campus, I talked about the Phragmites and the water retention, honeysuckle, autumn olive. A lot of those, as you look across the campus, you're seeing a lawn with a nice bush or tree. And you never even think about it, that this is honeysuckle or buckthorn, and that these are just spreading seeds every year more and more. And so what they really saw that is a lot of these are around the perimeters and the thin little hedgerows or woodlot sections that needed attention. And then garlic mustard was in just a few spots. There's a picture there along the parking lot. But what they found was just fields, just areas of acres almost of spotted knapweed, including the courtyard into their schools. So they kind of set an action plan to attack those woody plants as well as this knapweed. Go ahead, next. And so the two pictures to the right are students out there cutting and dragging and our staff helping. Some of the buckthorn and honeysuckle and autumn olive that's in the yard. And then the picture at the left is the courtyard just covered in spotted knapweed. And that became our ongoing project. Within the first 2 years, we took care of all the garlic mustard, buckthorn, autumn olive that was around the central campus. And so the next couple of years really focused on this courtyard project, we call it. Next. And so it was a combination of removing spotted knapweed and the other invasives from the schools and then start introducing native plants. So in addition to learning about invasives, they started learning about native plants and different ones. And in the beginning, most of these, they're just seeing small ones that we planted. But after a couple of years, these things are growing up and really flourishing. And so they really got a nice growth. Next. We also work with them about wildlife enhancement and the importance of putting native plants and the connection to native animals. And but also doing things like bird feeders or water feeders, which they were really excited about doing that kind of work. And we were able to later partner with students that outgrew our system, but still wanted to be engaged. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but the 9th grade shop and some of the other older grades that have been through this as younger started to help make bird houses and others. And then other grades that weren't part of this project or classes did some of those projects. I put the little picture of the woolly bear caterpillar out there because even just little bits of lice or grasshoppers or was really great. They got bluebirds coming in and other things. So it was just really nice for them to see some of these things happening over time. Go ahead. So this is a little bit of the before and after as we get through the project. You know, a lot of these lawns on the campuses look like this. And in addition to some of the work was working with mowing it down with our staff or the maintenance staff coming in to capture some of those seeds to spread. But we also had to do a lot of work with the park maintenance staff because their guys with their mowers would come screaming through fields like this, scoop up all the seeds from the knapweed, go to the next field, spread it all over there, pack it up, go to the next school, spread it all over. So these seeds were spread every day from school to school, from field to field within every campus. And it really takes a lot of work to work with your school maintenance to bring that awareness. And we can talk about that a little bit at the end if you like. So next. So we started out really trying to mow that field down and then digging into it. And we started to draw out little patches to make mini gardens. And over time, like I said, you only got like 20 minutes, an hour with each group of students. So we would break them into subgroups in the field with volunteers and our staff. And for first hour of the day, 25 students would be out there. The next hour, another 25, the next hour. And by the time we got through 2 days of that, we've gone through, you know, a good 10 different plots in the schoolyard to be pulling out knapweed, replacing soil, putting in mulch and putting in native plants, and then planting trees and putting in birdhouses and other enhancements. And We would do that twice a year for those students. And it just kept growing and growing. And so it looked kind of bare. Leah Savigny has been involved with that all the time. She just posted a thing in the chat room, but these aerial photos are for her getting up on the roof, taking aerial photos, and we really appreciate that timetable for that. I wouldn't encourage your students to do that, but you can get somebody else to do it. But this is the element the students absolutely love. They love working the tools. They love working the soil and the plants. And they have 100 questions, and we're glad to help them with all that. And it gives them abilities to them work when they come out to our parks in other places in their community. Next. One of the things that I really love about doing landscape work, and is great with the students, is you get immediate results. When you start at the beginning of the day and everything's rough and weedy and dirty looking, and then at the end of a day or 2 days, everything's looking really nice, you feel like you did good. And so the students, we kind of say you're building on everybody, even though you're only doing a little bit yourself. There's 200 students working over 2 days. And the outcomes of these beds going from just bare dirt and weeds to becoming really nice garden plots. And part of our goal of doing the plots was also to create this as an outdoor classroom for everybody at the school to use. And so we wanted means for people to walk through here, for other classes to do this, and a lot of other tools, not only for students to get out on nice days, but other grades to do their studies. And that just kept growing over time, where that courtyard had just become a wasteland for the school that nobody was using it. And now it's become a really good learning area till this year with COVID. We hope to get it back. Next. And so as you can see, the sites have progressed. The one picture to the upright corner, you'll see a compost bin and some garden boxes. Those are from other grades not working with us that has started enhancing that area. And the field past the sidewalk to the right is an area that another school did. The information board down to the bottom right is one that the shop class built. So other groups got into it. This is the only picture with me in it, so I have to take credit for that. Next. And then this one I just put in to show some of the pride, different students standing by, but you're also seeing those beds with now native plants taller than the students, and really are showpieces for the community and for the teachers. And they're doing tours for other students and for parents that are coming in. And it's really been a proud project that is going on, and that we've had to work for years and years. And so, but next. I'm not sure where my slide is, but I just wanted to comment again that we started out with 8th graders. I think I have a slide in here, and then it shifted to, we're doing 3 different grades a year. Went back. And I'll comment on that again. But so I think there's a slide coming up, but we also, yeah, that's the one. Thank you. So it started out with 1 grade, and then, as you know, every year your curriculum changes and who's assigned to what, and teachers change. So we have to adjust this constantly every year. But the last few years, it's been the 7th graders get introduced to Groundswell. They're doing land-based projects with the courtyard as their core project, and outreach to the parks as their community work. The 8th graders are focusing on the rivers, the streams, doing ponds, which are adjacent to their school on the campus, as well as this is when they get a river trip going down the Rogue River, and looking at invertebrates and water tests and all that. And then 9th grade, they're doing other projects. But as those students progress from 7th, 8th, 9th grade, they get this huge 3 years of Groundswell experience. And then 10th, 11th, 12th grade, they're still in the high school, they're still on that campus, and they're seeing that work and other students work, so they come and help. But they also are doing things like those signs and birdhouses and other elements, and some of the work with the parks. And so we have set up mutual classes with the shop and with phys ed classes to come out and do experiences in the park is well built on those experiences because the students had that foundation. So all these set really good foundations for future years. I don't know if we got to go back one or up one or go backwards. There we go. Oh, that's the one. So this is an outreach. As I mentioned, the students started out to aid a park every year, which we just had a huge garlic mustard invasion. And not only this school, but a number of other students from other schools involved with Groundswell and not came out, as well as scout groups and other community groups, and just did sweeps through these parks. And it helped our region of the stewardship network win the cup every year for the garlic mustard challenge because we just had so much students and others have just really been part of that motivation. So it's really great because they get hands-on right away, something they can succeed at, something they can see a difference afterwards and believe they made a difference because they understand how these plants can hurt the local flora and ecology and believe they're doing a difference. And while they're out there, they're learning, they're getting healthy outdoor experiences. So they're great. The last couple of years, because they were so successful, we started to bring them out to Roselle Park, which is much closer to the school, essentially across the Grand River from them. And almost all of them have been to that location because it's more of a neighborhood park for them. And so that's a little bit more involved. We can go to the next slide. You can kind of digest this as I talk. But again, when I talk about those logistics in the beginning, where we have to set these plans up, how do we work this out and schedule it? The school wanted us to do the whole grade all at once. We got it down to 2 days. It's 200 students. So we had 100 students each day to do a field trip. And then it became we had to do them all in 1 day. And so this logistics that we're showing is we had 100 students bust out in the morning, divide them up into 4 groups, rotated them through rotations on the site. As they're having lunch, the other half of the kids are coming out, having lunch. Then the first group goes home, the second group stays, rotate them through the thing. And so those rotations are only 20 minutes to 40 minutes for the work they can do. So we had to have not only all those logistics set up with the school, but also for all our projects. So we identified 4 really clear projects that the groups could do, resource people for each of those. Some of those groups we divided into 2 different projects because 25 is too many to work with in the field. And some was dealing with invasive plants, but one of the ones that was really fun, we call it seed bombing. They literally renovated or restored an old meadow that had got all dug up when we built the new building out there by collecting native seeds all through the year. And then bringing them out, and we mixed it with dirt, and the kids spread those all over the seed. And it was just hilarious because I would say, just run and throw. And they said, really? And when they get a chance to throw dirt and throw seeds, it's like being permitted to do things they're never allowed to do. But that field now is a beautiful meadow, thanks to these students year after year, seeding that field with seeds that they brought from other sites, including that courtyard now. And so they really understand that piece of reintroducing places. There's other smaller flower beds that they introduced, things, rain gardens that they got to work on. In other half of the work is they went out and did these aquatic investigations where they're checking for microinvertebrates, dip netting, and those kind of activities in the park. So they had quite an experience, but it's really a zoom experience doing that. I'm out of slides here, it looks like, so.
Yep. We went through your whole slideshow and it's time to move on to Jesse's second portion. You did have one question, and that was, Mara, did you have that question about the COVID precautions?
Yeah, we have 2 questions actually. The first is where do those tools and soil and plants come from with these projects on the school campuses, Mark?
So there's two sets of tools. One through the Groundswell funds. When we did the project planning, the schools put in their budget for tools. So there was loppers and little hand trowels and wheelbarrows, and then our Parks Department brought a bunch of those as we went as well. They also put in money for the plants and the wood chips, and we also had resource people help with some of those as well. So that goes into that budget planning and partnership work to get some of those. So now there's a whole shed there and a set of tools for students to work on.
Great. And
All
then
right, we're gonna save the rest of the questions to the end of the presentation. We've got to move on.
Sounds good.
We'll save those to the end. Thanks.
Thanks,
Introduce
Mark.
Jesse
Yep,
Schulte
thank you.
again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you
Those
so
were-
much.
Mhm. Those were inspiring examples, Mark. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Okay. All right, so what I wanted to talk to you today about is that the control method really depends on the plant size, the size of the infestation, and your comfort level. So the type of plant, size, and comfort level. And like Mark was talking about, a well-designed habitat project will have ripple effects for wildlife and water quality, and it really just takes a teacher or parent that can get everything started. The most important part about controlling your invasives is really picking your battles. So it would be scouting your property, and you want to look for those outliers first. So you really need to become intimate with your property and learn, as you can see this A that's right out here, you're going to want to tackle that first before you drop all your resources and time into B. So an example would be if you were using the Misten app, which you can map your site via, Claire will talk a little bit about this at the very end of the program, but you can do it via computer or with smartphones. And here's just a snapshot of some of the local neighbors who had already started mapping some of the invasives on Misten. So for Central Woodlands, they have a large infestation of Oriental bittersweet vine right at the entrance driveway in their natural forested trail area. And they are interested in prioritizing there. But first, they want to make sure they've looked at the entire campus and looked for adjacent populations. There could be a large bittersweet vine that's kind of like the mother vine, and that could actually be located on adjacent property. And we were able to successfully work with one of the Groundswell schools in downtown Grand Rapids. They had invasive Japanese knotweed, which our strike team was able to treat. So we got the private property owner on board with it, and then that helped reduce the spread onto the school campus. So again, that's the first step. You're going to want to identify where your invasives are. At the Central Woodlands example, you have bittersweet vine here at the entrance. You have some outliers that some of the local neighbors had identified. And then you also have buckthorn in the wetlands. This buckthorn can impact Carl Creek Preserve and, like we talked about, the watershed. But what's interesting here is that Chris Patrick was able to identify a buckthorn through a smartphone app in the courtyard. He has both glossy and common buckthorn. So all of a sudden that becomes a priority because it's a berry producer. And that berry producer, that mature buckthorn, will be impacting not just here, but also the wetlands on campus. So that becomes the #1 priority. Again, you're going to look for those outliers by doing scouting and mapping, and then push back, attack those outliers first before you drop all your time and resource into that larger population. For any invasive species, I know it can feel so overwhelming on some of the campuses, and Patty was talking about how overwhelmed she feels with bittersweet on the Central Woodlands. You're going to need to use an integrated pest management. So it's going to take multiple techniques. For those of you that aren't familiar with integrated pest management, it basically means you use every resource you can to control that invasive. When I worked out in California on artichoke thistle that escaped from cultivation, we were literally using weed whackers to cut the plant down to stop the carbohydrate from growing back up. And then when I worked with the Nature Conservancy, we actually used herbicides. So we'll cut the plant off, and then we'll apply an herbicide so that it permanently translocates into the roots and never grows back. There are biocontrols for some species like purple loosestrife, and those beetles can be bought for about $1 a beetle from the tip of the mitt. They're actually selling those, and we're releasing those along the Rogue River. But even in sites like Huff Park, where purple loosestrife is taking over, we actually use integrated pest management. So we use an aquatic herbicide to foliar treat on the outer edge where there's really high quality sedges. And then the herbicide is very selective, so it'll leave those sedges and grasses. And then the other areas will allow the beetles to continue to control. Well, biocontrols are probably going to be the option for long-term control, and I'm hopeful that they'll release garlic mustard biocontrol maybe in the near future. They've released it in Canada. But for now, humans are really going to be the biocontrol. So you and your students are really going to need to take action. Even on buckthorn, they've tried to do a study for over 11 years, and they weren't able to find anything that was host specific to buckthorn. So you're going to have to get out there, just like Mark talked about, doing the hand removal efforts. Again, you're going to focus on those outliers and push in. And with garlic mustard, you actually have to double bag this species. Many of you guys have a lot of experience with it. But the most important part is to get that seed head so that it doesn't reproduce. And if you pile it, a lot of times there is so much energy reserved in that plant that it'll actually just kind of pull back up and go to seed, even if you pile the garlic mustard. Cascade Township is going to have their dumpster again, I believe this year, where you can bring your double bagged garlic mustard, and you're going to want to figure out a method for your on-site disposal on campus and make sure that you don't compost this. Again, here's an example of one of the student volunteers who was working in the meadow, and she was able to find a single plant. So that single garlic mustard is able to stop a huge spread and is worth probably even more than some of those larger populations. I'll talk a little bit about at the very end how we do foliar treatments and how you can find out a little bit more about that. Spotted knapweed is one we talked about that might impact some of your areas that you're doing native plantings in. And this is one that you're going to want to make sure that your students have gloves and that they're wearing gloves, because the sap can be quite an irritant, and some people say might even be carcinogenic. So make sure you wear gloves when you're pulling those out. You want to make sure you get the tap roots. So whenever I've worked with volunteers, I always say, let's count how many you can pull out, but I'm only counting the tap root. And that's why you want to make sure the day that you pull these invasives is a day where maybe the soil is a little bit moister. So maybe there's been a rain event in the last week. Pulling out invasives. So the Cooperative Invasive Species Management area, we actually have a weed popper that you can borrow. It's a mechanical device that's basically a lever. So you're going to put your the base of the lever on the woody stem, and then you're going to kind of jack it up. Unfortunately, one thing to consider with mechanical removal, we had a lawyer down the hall from us at the USDA office, and she actually took chains with her tractor and pulled up all the autumn olive on her property, and she made this giant pile of autumn olive. And unfortunately, all the autumn olive grew back. Because she didn't follow through with every little stem in the ground, the roots, there was fragments of roots that were under the ground. So you're really going to need to use that integrated pest management on some of these invasives and make sure that you're going to treat those stumps or treat some of the extended root systems. So this gets us to herbicide, and I know that this is a careful topic for our campuses. But when you're identifying these invasive species and prioritizing where you're going to do your treatment, so you're going to prioritize, map, you're going to find areas that you might need chemical treatment or herbicide treatment. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. The Kent Conservation District uses a number of treatments. We have our business license and herbicide applicator license, and I know many of you guys don't. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about how you could use herbicide as a technique, we actually have a free training and Eventbrite program that's going to be March 15th at 7 p.m. And I kind of go a little bit more into depth. But during that program, we'll talk about basal bark treatments and using the Michigan DNR best management practice sheets and how to do hack and squirt. But for campuses, we have helped Forest Hills School with spraying large patches of poison hemlock near their football stadium, and also treating Japanese knotweed. This is something that we can do, obviously, when the students are not on campus, and then we post outside the doors of the school. The grounds and maintenance team are responsible for giving the public notice about that, and they just let them know what product that we're going to use and when we are going to do that. But I have noticed that some schools are trying to make up their own treatment for the stumps of these invaders. And I just want to remind you that these are also herbicides because they can impact the soil microbes. One common favorite is vinegar and salt. And that's something that maybe topically could kill, like the chickweed. You see the picture up here. So you're going to topically kill it. The herbicides that we're using that are EPA registered and habitat specific are systemic. So they're going to translocate into the roots of the plant. So that way you have long-term control. You just need to think about when you're using your own home mixes, some of these can also be very toxic to frogs or macroinvertebrate or the soil when you're trying to replant. So think about that when you're using these home remedies. Stump treatments. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Something I think you can do on campus is cut some of these woody invasives like the buckthorn and the bittersweet, and I'll go into more detail with that. And with the cut stump treatment, really what you're doing is you're just focusing on using a small amount of aquatic herbicide on that outer ring or that sapwood, that soft sapwood. And the cut stump method is very effective against resprouts, which can save you so much time. But when you're doing that treatment, you don't want to do it during spring when there's heavy sap flow. And most people, when they give us a call and they ask us about helping them with treatments, they always think spring is the time to get at invasives. And it is for pulling garlic mustard and doing treatments on garlic mustard. But for most of the other invasives, it's actually the worst time of the year to do treatments. We do our invasive barberry treatments in the winter. So we actually cut the stems down and then we daub them with a concentrated herbicide. And the Land Conservancy of West Michigan and the Aldo Leopold Preserve, they've been doing winter work days for years and getting amazing results. And one of the reasons is that you have these vernal pools and wetlands, they're all frozen. And students can actually get into those locations without worrying about mosquitoes or crushing some of the macroinvertebrates and still get in to control these woody invasives. So I love using the foldable hand saws because you can fold them up when you're walking from site to site. And we do cut stump during the winter. This is at Reed's Lake where we're controlling buckthorn. The other method that you can do that we recommended to Chris Patrick at Central Woodlands is some of these species you can actually just girdle and leave dead standing. You might be concerned about the biomass that you have on site. So you have a large buckthorn that's a berry producer. Again, you're going to prioritize your invasives and you want to prioritize those species that are berry producers. You can actually do a girdle where you actually cut into the stem and just leave it dead standing. So you can see these species right here. They're still structurally going to be habitat for birds. And they're going to stop the production of berries and you don't have to worry about hauling off all that woody debris. So here's an example right here. Like we said, we've got the larger buckthorn in the Central Woodlands courtyard. I think they're going to actually cut it and remove it and pull it out and replace it with like a service berry. But that's something that you could do. So again, this is an example where she's just girdling it. She's taking off that sapwood and doing a double ring and just leaving it dead standing. For some of the smaller plants, you're going to actually need to cut those down to the ground completely. And then in the winter, like I said, it's a wonderful time to just daub those stumps the teachers can daub those stumps, or what we did with Greg Peterson and Mary Lewandowski at C.A. Frost Environmental Academy. They actually scheduled a separate day where I went out with them. So volunteers and adult volunteers went out after and then recut some of the stems and did some herbicide treatment, or used an herbicide that you can use days after instead of the glyphosate, which you have to use right away. We use a blue dye when we do those treatments, and we make sure we don't cut that stump too high. We want to cut it as low as we can to the ground, but we don't want to get any soil on that stump because the soil can make our herbicide inactive. What we've been finding really handy, and we've been using it with the Kent County Parks, is this little dauber called a buckthorn blaster. And it's been really leak proof, which is wonderful. It's small enough to kind of transport in our pocket. And the buckthorn blasters are only $7. We actually sell them at the Conservation District during our eco stewardship work days. And so a perfect kit to do treatments. If your students are pruning and cutting, then you as the adults could use a non-restricted herbicide in a buckthorn blaster. That's a pre-mixed product, and follow up as the students are cutting. The same method would be used for our invasive oriental bittersweet vine, which I think needs to be prioritized on all campuses. The bittersweet vine can grow 66 feet tall and strangle our trees. To tackle this invasive, which can feel really overwhelming, is you want to focus on the largest vines first, on the high quality tree species. So there might be some oaks that you really value that it's climbing up. What we do is a poodle cut. Thanks to Rebecca Marcourt, she made this great design. You're going to first identify the vines, make sure that you're not cutting grapevines, which are kind of brown and scaly. You've got that cream colored dippled bark of the bittersweet. And then what you're going to do is you're going to cut as high as you can, depending on the size of the volunteer or student or you. And why you're doing that is because you're trying to block this braided lattice that goes up the tree. You don't want those little stems to jump up and use that braided lattice to climb up to reclimb up the tree. So this is an example of a bittersweet vine that was cut too high. Remember, you want to cut that vine fairly low to the ground. And again, I would use the same kind of treatment kit, pre-mixed herbicide that is not restricted use, a dauber bottle where all you have to do, like a bingo dauber, is daub that stump so that it never grows back. I don't recommend piling the invasives. If you're so lucky to have a wood chipper, you can pull it out to the wood chipper. But I would not spend time on piling. It seems like a lot of times the students love to show off all that they've cut, but remind them to just drop it on site. These woody invasives will not regrow. You can just kind of chop them up into bits and just leave them right on site. So we do have that Eventbrite landowner training where we talk about foliar treatments, and I think that's something that some of the maintenance and grounds crews will need to be encouraged to do when your students are off campus. But for larger infestations of bittersweet, we actually do two methods. We cut the vines off the tree like we talked about here. And then the second part is, unfortunately, when the infestations get so large, we have to do a foliar spray during the growing season in July and August so that these plants don't spread anymore. And I think we need to encourage some of the grounds maintenance crews to help with that.
Okay, Jessie, I'm gonna have to stop you there. So much good information, but we do have to send it over to Claire for her little portion, and then we'll be able to follow up with a little bit of email if you want to have any closing points, and then I'll let you send it to Claire when you're ready, okay?
Sounds great. I'd love to hear from Claire because I think that's the first step in mapping.
Hi everyone. I don't have a presentation, but I just wanted to be here to answer, any questions that you may have about MISN. I'm the data manager for the project, so I handle, all the data that comes into us. I help out our state's SISMAs with getting them information that they may need or putting the general public in touch with their local SISMA. So I kind of do it all. I help with the website and the smartphone app as well. I guess I would open it up. Do you want me to go over the app or?
I think that would be great.
Sure.
They could use it for their campuses to map what's on campus, over multiple years. And then also that can be a help to our cooperative invasive species management area as we try to get more funding to these communities for these invasives.
Sure. Yeah, so the smartphone app, it's available on Apple devices and Android devices. It's really straightforward. You log in, and then like it's shown on the screen, we have the options to either select a plant or an animal. And then those options are broken down into habits. So, algae, herbs, shrubs, and whatnot. And then once you select those habits, it'll open up the species list. And that's where you'll select the species that you'd like to report. We have photos. So it's the same photos that you'll find on our website on the fact sheets. We have a distribution map, so you can kind of see if there's any observations in your area. You could do that easily by hitting the where am I once you open up the distribution map, and it'll zoom to your area. And you can also see, what's, how many records we have and whatnot. But then the app, the form is very simple. It'll automatically pick up on your device location. So you'll see the coordinates on the reporting form. And then you'll just figure out, the area and the density. It could be an estimate. We have, kind of basic ranges for the area. And then you can include any comments you'd like. And we encourage people to include at least one photo. So if it is a priority species that you're not 100% sure, on the identification, at least there's a photo so somebody can go and verify it. And then, if it requires treatment or anything like that, your local SISMA can come out or your organization can assist with the treatment. The same, with the website, it's kind of the same. We require you to have the account so that we can get in touch with you in case it is a species that's on the, the restricted list or the priority list for the state. And you can go in, you could view the training modules, you could view species fact sheets. We have a lot of different help on the website. We have the distribution map, so you can view species, you can view, the records that have come in by date. If you're interested in looking at a specific project, you can look at the, records that have come in for that project. You could also find links to Eyes on the Forest, which is another project that we work on, and that's with sentinel trees. And we have different state resources. Let's see. We have maps on demand, which is very helpful. And those you can request a specific state if you want the entire Midwest region, and it'll send you a map via email. And it'll just show you the hot spots. So the counties, it's color coded, red being the county that has the most observations in it for that specific species. And we also allow people to set up species alerts. So if you're interested in getting notified when a certain species is reported in either your county or the entire state, you'll receive an email once that lands in our database. And that way you could just keep track of, if people are finding a specific species that's new in your area, and it will notify you in the email if it's a new first observation for that county. And when you go to report on our website, we have a little tab up at the top that just says report. And this will break down into, it's very similar with the app. So it starts off with listing all the species. You could search just by animal, by plant, disease, or you could use the 3 text boxes we have available that allows you to type in, so you can narrow down your search for a common name, a scientific name, or a family type. And then once you find the species, if you're going through the list, clicking on the name will bring up the reporting form. If you're going by the text boxes, the common name, scientific name, and family type boxes, that once you select the species, it will automatically bring you to the reporting form. And it's very similar to the app. Like I said, the form starts off with a map, and that's where you'll place a pinpointer on the map just so we know where their location is. You could search by coordinates, address, anything, cross streets will work as well. And then you just click that point on the map and fill out the rest of the form. And so we require the same information that's on the app. The only thing that is not automatically filled out is the date. So that's another thing that you'd have to select on the website. But once you put that marker on the map, the coordinates automatically fill in, and then, just submit your app or submit the report, and it lands in our database, and you'll be able to view it immediately on the distribution map.
Claire, we do have a question
Sure.
from Leah. When you put a new species or a data input into the app or the website, do you receive a message when that record is input?
I don't personally receive a message saying that we've received new data, but I, go in and check every day, and I make sure that, the data is correct. If there's any questions, I'll reach out to the observer, but I don't personally get, notifications, but I do keep an eye on the database.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Claire? Awesome. Claire, anything else you want to add before we move it back to Jessica?
Oh gosh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
No problem. Thank you so much. That was so informative.
Sure.
Thank you so much. We have so much great information that we could keep talking all night, but I do want to have the last 5 minutes to answer the rest of the questions that were put into the chat. But of course, thank you so much to our presenters, to Claire, to Mark, and to Jesse for investing your time in preparing for us. So I did see a few other questions in the chat.
Yep, we have 2 questions that that haven't been answered yet. I think the first one is best answered by Groundswell. How are you managing all this work with COVID, not sending volunteers to schools? What is the masking protocol? Do you share tools? And just, can we elaborate a little bit on that?
I think that question was for Mark.
Yeah, there's 2 parts to that. One, in terms of projects that go beyond the school year. A lot of these projects have summer work and garden projects, and so you have to kind of account how do you water things and they'll manage it when the students aren't there. And then this last year has been really a challenge with COVID, and again, the year coming up, how to plan. Certainly some of the lessons can be done as online learning, but that's not the whole experience, and it doesn't reduce what's on the ground. And so we have set up some things where students can go out independently and volunteers can go out independently, so they're not group activities. It's kind of like setting up a scavenger hunt on your school grounds or a park where they can come in, but it really does limit what you can do during this time for class-based projects or for group experiences. And the cost of that, besides the student learning, is that the plants are going to grow all that time. And so areas that you think you may have cleared out, it's got a whole nother year of growth coming before you can get back in there. And so this is where you kind of have to reassess your plans and your projects and your resources. And you may have to go back a little bit more next year, or and go in. And I think some of it is, when Jesse really said, what can be done in the spring and what should be done in the winter and what should be done in the fall is another way to redirect those resources. So there may be some things that you want to do all this work come this, spring. Well, you're not going to be able to be out in the field, and some of that may be better to do next fall.
Thanks, Mark. We have a question for Jesse. Is girdling effective with all large invasive shrubs and trees? Should herbicide be added to the girdle on some species?
Jesse's on mute.
Yeah, being able to use herbicide, or take your dauber and use it around the girdle mark would probably be most successful, because a lot of these invasive that we're really concerned about, like buckthorn, they're so hardy. So that's what I would recommend. But if you do that double or triple girdle, that's going to definitely slow it down. And sometimes it takes quite a long time for the plant to die. So if you add that herbicide just on the outer edge of it, it'll die a lot quicker. So I know at CA Frost, on the border of Blandford Nature Center, we girdled a bunch of Scotch pine, and that took multiple years. But then in the backwoods, in the back 40, we girdled buckthorn, and we just did like a hatchet, but you can just do a handsaw. And then we did use a little bit of herbicide on that outer edge, and then it died really quickly.
Nice. And then one more question for you, Jesse. Can you remind us about that upcoming workshop for landowners, the date or a link to share with us in the chat?
I was just trying to Google it on Eventbrite, but it's actually March 15th at 7 p.m. It's a free landowner invasive species treatment program. And we talk about assembling your own treatment kit. So you can find that on Eventbrite. And also when she sends out the PDF, it'll have that link there too.
We will include that in our email following this session to make sure that everyone has it if you missed any of the links.
And that is the conclusion for questions right now. As we've said, ongoing, if you have specific questions for any of our presenters or for Groundswell, feel free to contact them directly. They're all happy to answer your questions, happy to chat more about a specific species that you're having trouble with or a specific question that you have. Over to you, Jessica.
All right, I went ahead and dropped the sketch form in the chat, so feel free to follow that link if you would need some sketches for today. Once again, thank you everybody for your time. Let us know if you have any questions. We will follow up this email with information on getting your book and the downloadable information that we also shared with the links. Thank you to our presenters and have a wonderful evening. We will hold on for about 5 more minutes, seeing if anyone else has questions. Have a great night.